Welcome everybody to Drinking Liberally here in the friendly confines of the 331 Club in Northeast Minneapolis.
Is that where we are?
Yeah. That's where we are. I like to think of it as the best spot for good liberal conversation in town. Don't you agree, everybody? We have a special guest tonight who I will introduce in just a moment. But there are a couple of other people who I want to introduce you to before we start. First is Jennifer. Where did Jennifer go? Jennifer, there she is. Jennifer's my co-host. If you have any questions or complaints, talk to Jennifer.
All of the complaints to Jennifer.
And our regular treasurer, Alicia, is not here tonight, but we have two assistant treasurers who will be happy to take your dues money and treat them well. We don't have a tip credit yet, but they still need the money. I don't know that there are any $100,000 servers behind the bar. So anyway, with that, I just wanted to mention a couple things about Mark. When I was preparing for introducing him tonight, I did a little research, and there's some very interesting things about Mark Dayton. He's a very modest fellow. He doesn't talk about himself very much. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
I have enough other people talking about me.
Yeah, okay, well. How many candidates in the gubernatorial race have families that hail from Worthington, Minnesota? Any guesses? All right, there's one. Anybody else? Oh, Mark Dayton. Mark's got his rural bona fides just like everybody else in the race. In fact, there's a Dayton house. It's on the
my great-grandfather's house.
Is on the National Historic Register in Worthington, Minnesota. The next question is, how many Division A hockey players are there in the gubernatorial race this year?
14.
Well, actually, yeah. There are two. One who talks about it a lot, and one who doesn't. Mark was the varsity goalie for the Yale hockey team. Managed to graduate with honors from Yale. Perhaps he and Tommy will be having a face-off before this is all done. One other interesting thing to me: how many statewide races has Mark Dayton won?
2.
No, actually 3 if you count the primary.
Well, if you count the primary one, 5.
Okay, see, then even I was in there. So, and that may be meaningful in a statewide race, which the governor is. So. We've had the other candidates for governor here. Tried to get Mark here before, but we're just finally able to put it together. And we're glad to have it. He's going to speak for a few minutes, and then we're going to take some questions and answers. But before we do that, I'll get back and kind of tell you a little bit about the ground rules for Q&A. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Dayton.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. A couple other introductions here. Is my son Andrew here yet? Andrew's here. That's my son Andrew Dayton. I have 2 wonderful sons, Andrew and Eric. I will say, fortunately for them, they inherited their mother's good looks and intelligence, so I can be very proud of both of them. I am. Thank you, Andrew, for coming tonight. I believe one of these cameras is probably the Republican tracker, so anything you say can and will be used against me, and anything I say can and will be used against me as well. But it's public gathering, so please treat them with dignity and respect. And yes, the one thing about my hockey career at Yale, the person who often went to our hockey games because he roomed with another Minnesotan who was an all-American hockey player at Yale was also the president of my fraternity at college, named President George Bush. And I used to surprise my Republican colleagues in the Senate by pointing out that back then the president and I were often in the same party. In fact, I told them, I said, well, I've seen the president take positions that none of you have. And, So those are actually Deeks, a fraternity, so I was not part of that one. I thank you very much for the invitation here tonight. I feel like I'm supposed to do a comedy routine or something up here. I won't be doing one intentionally. It might come out that way. But I am running for the Senate, for governor, and something like that. I ran for the Senate, and I left the Senate. The same, and I got asked that question. I left the Senate for much the same reason that Barack Obama left the Senate after 4 years to seek the presidency, and Hillary Clinton after 6 years to seek the presidency, that Joe Biden gave up 36 years of seniority in the Senate to go to the executive branch, because the executive branch is where you can lead from day one. And put an agenda before the legislature, or before the people, and make things happen and make a difference in people's lives, which has been my lifelong commitment to public service and what makes me want to do this again. I believe Minnesota is headed in profoundly the wrong direction, and if we continue, it's to our enormous peril, and to the peril of our children and grandchildren. And I don't want to be part of the first generation in our nation's history to leave this state and nation and world worse off to our children and grandchildren than we inherited it. And that's where I believe we're going today. In my first job out of college, I taught 2 years in a public school in New York City. Taught 9th grade general science down on the Lower East Side. I've always said it was the toughest job I ever had. And there are two things I learned very quickly. One is it takes an incredible amount of skill and dedication to become a good teacher. And secondly, I don't care how good a teacher you are, you cannot reach individually the 32 children that I had in one classroom with a number of students of that size. So when I go to Rochester, Minnesota, which is a fairly well-off part of our state, and I see 36 children in a 5th grade classroom with one teacher in a school that has 17 different languages and dialects, I know Minnesota's headed in the wrong direction. And I've seen those overcrowded classrooms all over our state. When I see school districts in this state going to 4-day school weeks because of lack of funds, not for educational reasons, but because they can't afford to provide school 5 days a week, I know this state is headed in the wrong direction, and I know we're leaving thousands of children behind, unfairly so. When I'm told by the National Student Association that the tuition at our 2-year public colleges is the 3rd highest in the nation, any state in the nation, and our 4-year public universities in the top 10, and when the tuition at the University of Minnesota is 50% higher than the average of the state universities in the surrounding 4 states, I know that we're going in the wrong direction. And when we face a $6 billion budget deficit for the next biennium, in addition to the deficits we faced in the last ones, and you realize that since Tim Valenti became governor, there are 200,000 more people living in Minnesota and 14,000 fewer people working in our state, not to mention those that are underemployed, not to mention those that have given up looking for work and are no longer in the count. You realize again we are going in fundamentally the wrong direction. And when you also realize, as part of that budget equation, that the richest 10% of the people in Minnesota, that's 278,000 households with average incomes of $310,000 a year, are paying, according to the Minnesota Department of Revenue, Governor Valenti's own Department of Revenue, only 3/4 of what the rest of Minnesotans are paying in state and local taxes. And the wealthiest 1%, where people are making over $1,200,000 a year on average, are paying only 2/3 of what everybody else is paying in state and local taxes. You know Minnesota's going in fundamentally the wrong direction. Now, I'm told, even by my worthy DFL opponents, that I'm trying to raise too much revenue by taxing the rich. Well, my goodness gracious, I remember the days when progressive taxes was a fundamental tenet of the DFL party and the Democratic Party. And as Paul Wilson, my friend, used to say, the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. And when tax cuts were passed in 1998 and in 2000, that allowed somebody making on average $1 million a year in Minnesota to have their income tax reduced by $66,000 over the last decade. And the top property tax bracket was eliminated at about that time, which means that the home that was put on the market in Lake Minnetonka recently for $58 million got a property tax reduction. You realize this state has gone in fundamentally, profoundly the wrong direction, and that will change if I'm governor. It will change if I'm governor. will invest that money in education and quality health care and good public transit as well as highway system around this state. And we'll put the money where it can go to work, to put Minnesotans to work. And I could go on and on, but I'll stop there and I'll be glad to respond to your questions. But thank you very much for your interest in being here tonight.
Well, thank you, Mark. We have just a couple of rules for the Q&A. First of all, the number one rule around here is, what's the number one rule around here, everybody?
There are no rules.
Body's in charge.
No, the number one rule is don't give the microphone to a member of the audience. Because you probably won't get it back. The second thing is, it is questions and answers. So if you have a question with a long predicate on it, try not to ask it. Be direct and brief, and give Mark a chance to address the whole group with the answer. He's the one that came to here, not you. So, and as the host, I get the first two questions. And again, if you don't like it, you can complain to Jennifer. The first question is, you didn't try and seek the DFL endorsement for governor. Why didn't you do that?
Well, back in 1997, I was running for governor the first time, and I had sought the party endorsement and very grateful to receive it in 1982 when I ran for the Senate, in 1990 when I ran for auditor. But I came to believe then, summer of 1997, that the proper role for the party was to, and party leaders, was to recommend through the caucuses and then the state convention, recommend to the voters, to the people, who the party's nominee should be, but not want to dictate to the voters who the only candidate on the ballot should be. And I wrote a letter back then to the DFL Central Committee and other party leaders, and I learned from my heresy, what history shows, that heretics are excommunicated at best and executed at worst, and they're seldom embraced and almost never endorsed. I don't think somebody should have to tell the DFL delegates at the convention that he or she will abide by that decision if they don't get endorsed, and that's the prerequisite, the requirement in order to be competitive to get endorsed. So I just believe, with all due respect, and I do mean it respectfully, because a lot of my friends are part of the party and are party leaders, and I hope to have their support after the primary if I'm successful. But in a democracy, the people should decide, and that means all the people who vote in the primary or the general election.
All right, and then the second one is, Bob, I told you I got two. The second question is, and you touched on this briefly, but you didn't seek a second term as a senator, and some of us are pretty disappointed about that. Can you address that a little bit more?
Well, my decision not to seek re-election opened the door for Minnesota to elect the first women to the United States Senate, Amy Klobuchar, and I say that I think Amy's a big improvement over her predecessor. I know them both well, so I can speak with authority on the subject. But, and I was there at 51-49 in the majority. Paul's plane went down. As Don McLean said, that was the day the music died. We went to 50-50 at that point. Would have been, and instead we were 49-51, and then we went to 45-55, and I just felt, obviously that number changed. Fortunately, the Democrats became the majority, but I was 100th in seniority when I arrived. I was 79th after a term. I felt that I could get another term. I think I would have, certainly just by my vote against the Iraq War, when Mark Kennedy was a supporter of that. So I think that hypothesis was correct. But in the Senate, you serve, as Ted Kennedy did, 42 years, and you still can't put your lifelong cause of health care for everyone on the agenda, the front burner. And the president walks in as president. I'm not totally pleased with the bill that was passed by the Senate and the Congress, but it did get passed within a little over a year of his taking office. The executive branch is, again, where you can lead and lead from day one. And I want to make a difference. I'm 63 years old. I don't have 42 more years to serve in the U.S. Senate. And I want to make a difference now on behalf of Minnesota.
All right.
Yes, sir.
We got to go to Bob.
Okay.
I'm a Democrat.
That'll make two of us.
Yes, and I've been in every precinct caucus and district convention since 1972. So I believe in the party. And what I will ask you is to go along with the question about why you didn't run inside the party is, do you think you would have won endorsement by the party?
I don't know. Not without promising to abide by the endorsement decision. Yeah.
Senator, question that keeps coming up in my mind as I'm interacting with other Democrats is, and I want to know how you're going to deal with it, is a lot of Democrats I speak with are nervous about you and your candidacy because of your personal wealth. They have a real problem with that. That's what they're telling me. They have a problem. They said wealthy people do not understand the needs of the less advantaged. And my retort to them always is, why don't you look at the senator's record? Why don't you look at Ted Kennedy's record? What does personal wealth have to do with what this candidate can do or what this politician can do for you? My question is to you, how can we address this? Because this seems to be a big stumbling block in the Democratic Party in Minnesota right now, is how can we get people past this personal wealth issue?
Oh, this is amazing. Tom Emmer is a Dayton supporter. Oh, I was supposed to get laughed. Well, I apologize.
You know, I mean, I am obviously who I am, from a very wealthy family, very fortunate in what I've been given. I've tried to use my good fortune in ways that have benefited other people, and I mean, people have to make that assessment about who I am and what my values are, what my convictions are, each for themselves individually. I mean, that's the essence of democracy.
All right. Can you somehow get that out to me then?
Well,
your record.
That's the purpose of a campaign, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
All right, I've got some agricultural questions.
How about we start with one, Art?
Okay. Who will you appoint as Commissioner of Agriculture?
I don't know. I have not offered any job or position to anybody other than Yvonne Pretner-Solon to be Lieutenant Governor. Certainly want somebody who's well qualified from agriculture, from a background as a farmer, professional experience, somebody who's committed to the approach to the agriculture that I am, that farmers need above parity prices in the marketplace, and that the role of government's policy should be to provide for those prices where farmers can make a profit, as anyone else needs to in the marketplace.
Can I have one more?
No. We'll go around.
Okay.
All right, we'll go here and then to Jack.
Okay. I'm a high school teacher, a teacher of foreign language. And when I hear a lot of what's going on about education in the public discussion, one thing that is left out is the idea that other countries have already realized that learning a foreign language at a young age helps in music and helps in math. It's like forming the brain to become a better learning brain. If you become governor, can you consider that when you think about expanding education and how learning another language is fundamental to becoming an excellent student as far as being compared, well, as compared to other countries? That's one place where we could really make a difference, and it wouldn't be that expensive.
Well, I would agree with you. I would certainly encourage that. I mean, I think those are decisions for local school boards to make, but I absolutely agree with you in this globalized economy that the young people are going to be living and working in. Absolutely, it's great for brain development, and it's great for the future. And I mean, since Governor Plenty took office, the per pupil aid, state aid, has been cut by $1,300 on average per pupil in real after inflation dollars.
I know.
We've had to cut back on everything that we should be offering, and not to mention offering more. So putting that state money, and my promise is that I'll increase state funding for public K-12 education every year I'm governor. No excuses, no exceptions. It's absolutely essential. And I thank you for what you're doing in that respect.
Jack.
Senator, non-point source pollution is the greatest threat to Minnesota water right now. And 80% of the non-point source pollution comes off agricultural land, and is exempt, which is exempt from the stormwater runoff rules. What would you do as governor to get agriculture to do its share of cleaning up Minnesota water?
Well, I'll encourage sound farming practices. I'll encourage, again, the prices that allow. I think farmers are good stewards of the land and want to be when they can, even more so when they can afford to be. You know, when I went to Washington, my #1 committee assignment request was the Senate Agriculture Committee. And I learned from Norm Larson down in Worthington, Nobles County, back when I ran the Senate the first time, about the need for farmers to get above parity prices in the marketplace so they can afford to do things necessary to be able to sustain their family farms and make a profit and farm in ecologically sound ways. I thought when I went to Washington that everybody would agree that that should be the objective, and we might disagree on how to get there. And then I found, as is true in Washington, and I say in general, that before I went to Washington I thought it was a cesspool, and after I got there I realized I underestimated how bad it is. But the powerful special interests out there, the processing, the distributing, the wholesaling, the retailing, agriculture interests all wanted commodity prices as low as possible, subsidized by taxpayers, so that they can have a bigger profit margin all the way up the line. And so when farmers are pressed and are trying just to basically to survive, that's when I think they get forced to practices that may not be in the best interest of overall ecology. So part of it is the economics, part of it is certainly that kind of awareness. Absolutely, yes, we need to be working on that. In 1998, when I ran for governor, my running mate was an anti-corporate feedlot activist. That's one of the major sources, these corporate cesspool lagoons that they put with these large livestock containment facilities. I call it the Department of the Minnesota Pollution Cooperation Agency. I've gone along with that for too many years. It should be a pollution reduction agency, and that should be part of their mandate.
Thank you. All right. Next, right here.
Well, as you pointed out, that many school districts have gone to 4-day school weeks. Property taxes have increased by double digits. Yet the billionaire owners of the Twins got a brand new stadium with public funding, and if elected governor, the Vikings are going to come up. I'd be willing to see him leave. I wish the Twins would have left rather than buying a new stadium. So I was just wondering what you would do when the Vikings come with hat in hand for state funding for a new stadium.
Well, I'm not in favor of building a $950 million stadium at taxpayer expense and turning it over to them as a playground. I will look at a stadium like any other major economic development project, and I served twice as Commissioner of Economic Development for the state, and I learned with any economic development project, the devils and the angels are in the details. If the economic benefits to Minnesota, in this case 8,000 jobs in the building trades where you got unacceptably high unemployment, and the taxes those workers pay and the taxes that the vendors pay to build a stadium or any other major facility, and the revenues generated by that, if all those economic benefits to the people of Minnesota are greater than the cost to the people of Minnesota, then it's a positive economic development deal, and I would support it. If the costs are greater than the benefits, then it's a bad deal, and I would not support it.
All right.
And I would apply that principle to any project. As I say, it's got to be in the public interest.
Brianna.
Have you taken a position on the sulfide and rare mineral mining in northern Minnesota? And if you can I ask what you plan to do to ensure that there isn't any negative consequences?
I've not taken a position because it's premature. The environmental review process has now been kind of recalibrated. My understanding, the EIS statement is really going back to square one. They've incorporated the land exchange into it. I'm glad that the next that timetable, which is probably now close to 18 months to 2 years in the future, means that we'll have a DFL governor, I hope and pray, and therefore DFL selected commissioners of DNR and again the Minnesota Pollution Reduction Agency and the other entities. The EPA gave it a failed review, as you probably know. I mean, it means it's got a long, long ways to go, and that kind of strong environmental oversight is an absolute responsibility of the next governor and his administration.
What will you do to ensure that every resident in this state has access to high-quality health care?
Well, I support national single-payer health care. I did along with Paul Wellstone for a decade. I think we'll get there in a decade or more. We have to. When United Healthcare, the largest health insurance company in the country, reports a quarterly profit of $1.2 billion, that's $1.2 billion in profits in 3 months by taking more money in for health care than they pay out. And by their own financial report, for every health care premium dollar they take in, they only pay 81 cents for health care. Medicare, which is far from perfect, pays 97 cents of every healthcare dollar for healthcare. So that difference is the reason that health insurance is unaffordable for thousands of Minnesotans who do have health insurance, and health care is unaffordable for them because, as one woman who's a single woman in mid-50s, I'd say, in St. Louis Park, gets her health coverage through a small business employer, told me she pays $7,000 a year for health insurance, but she has a $5,000 deductible, so she pays the first $5,000 for health care and a $2,000 deductible on her prescription drugs, so she pays $2,000 for her medicine before the $7,000 that she's paying for health insurance pays 1 penny. Well, that's just disgraceful. But I hear that all over the state. So you've got to have people who are uninsured, and you have people who have insurance who can't afford health care. And I mean, it's just it's an upside down system that puts profits ahead of people. I support the Minnesota health plan. How we get from point A to where we are today to that point Z. I guess now Senator Marty has said in cooperation with Speaker Keller that the first thing to do is have a study. It wasn't part of the DFL convention debate or discussion there from what I saw and what I read, but that's where it seems to be. So we'll have a study and assess the cost consequences and as they say, the roadmap from where we are today to where we want to go, and so there's some merit in that, I guess, to see what so you don't want people aren't going to accept making a significant change unless they know where they're going and they have some confidence that they're going to get there, but that seems to where it stands today.
And Mo down here. Hello, Senator.
How are you, sir?
My name is Ahmed Mohammed.
Sorry?
My name is Ahmed Mohammed.
Mohammed, how are you?
And I go by the name of Mo.
I go by the name of Mark. I'm called other things, but I answer Mark.
By the Mo, there are some people who have a phobia about Mohammed, like Shan Hannity and Raleigh and those guys.
I'm happy to call you Mohammed.
And my question is, I heard a lot of good stories about you. I'm involved with the Somali immigrants, the community. There's a lot of people, you help them, and you brought their families back here to them. And they were very, very, very thankful to you. And they are proud of you. But my personal question is, as long as you are a DFL member, and you've been there and they helped you for 40 years, over 40 years, and if you, tomorrow in the primary, if you get elected, nominated, all intents are nominated, what that will do to the DFL?
No, I think it'll give a good candidate for governor.
Yeah, but what it will do to the DFL? Will that weaken the DFL because that candidate couldn't win?
I think we need to elect a DFL governor. Virtually every DFL party leader and activist I've talked to all over the state, listened to all over the state, believes that number one, we need to elect a DFL governor. And I think we'll unite the party on August 11th to do that.
But how are you going to get the DFL voters if you disagree with their candidate?
Well, I believe, again, in democracy. And democracy means the people decide, and a free and fair election means the people have more than one candidate to choose from. So I believe primaries are healthy if they're conducted responsibly, as ours has been so far, as I believe ours will be for the next 19 days. It was helpful to me in 2000 when I ran the primary for the Senate, and it strengthened my candidacy. I think it was helpful to Skip Humphrey in 1998 when he won the primary for governor. He lost the general election, but he came out of the primary ahead. If we conduct this responsibly, as we are, and if we unite the party, then we'll elect a DFL governor.
But I disagree with you. The primary is the healthy one. Look at the southern.
Well, that's a great feature of democracy. We can disagree with one another.
Southern Carolina. They elected, the primary elected someone who didn't campaign, who didn't do anything, who can't even say yes sir or doesn't talk.
I've been involved in public service in Minnesota for 35 years. I've been all over the state. I've been to more counties in Minnesota more often than all the other candidates of all the other parties combined. I think people, and I've done more to help DFL candidates, whether or not I'm on the ballot or not, over the last 30 years. I'll put that my record of supporting the DFL and supporting DFL candidates up with anybody else's. And again, people can make their own decision. That's what's called democracy.
Sorry.
Thank you. Hey, Mark. You talked about adjusting the tax structure to play place a more fair burden on the wealthiest Minnesotans. Can you speak on how, in real numbers, that would impact the budget deficit that we're currently in?
I'd be glad to, Peggy. If the richest 10% of the people of Minnesota, this is from the Department of Revenue's own tax incident study, the richest 10% of the people, which is again 278,000 households with an average income of $310,000 a year, if they paid the same percent of their income in state and local taxes as the other 90% of Minnesotans, that would raise over $4 billion in the next biennium. That's a significant, obviously 2/3 of the projected $6 billion shortfall. And you know, we went back and looked in 1994, the last year of the Republican Governor Arnie Carlson's first term. The richest 10% of the people in Minnesota paid 12.6% of their income in state and local taxes. We had pretty much, except for the poorest 10% of the people in the state, we had pretty much a flat tax, state and local tax, as a percent of income. Today, as I said, it's steeply regressive, but I'm proposing to have the richest 10% pay 12.5% of their income in state and local taxes, the same as the rest of Minnesotans do today, the same basically as what they paid in 1994. And that's how bad things have become in Minnesota slowly. You know, it's the proverbially, you put the frog in the hot water, it jumps out. You put it in the lukewarm water and you turn the temperature up and it slowly, you know, falls asleep and dies. I mean, people don't realize how badly this thing has shifted from basically, when I ran against Rod Grams, who's a conservative Republican in 2000, he was proposing a federal flat tax. Everybody would pay the same percent of their incomes in federal taxes. Paul Wilson and I said, no, that's not good enough, we should be progressive. Well, a flat tax would be a huge improvement in Minnesota in terms of state and local taxes. It would mean $4 billion of additional revenue in the next biennium. Just have the richest 10% pay the same percent of their income in state and local taxes as everybody else does. Boy, I mean, how extreme is that?
Mark, as long as we're on the subject of taxes, I've owned a home in Minneapolis for about 11, 12 years now. My property taxes have literally tripled. I would go as far as saying I'm nearly being taxed out of my home. To what degree do you think that has to do with LGA that's been cut by our current governor, and what might you do about it?
I think the fact that property taxes in Minnesota, according to the state auditor, have more than doubled in the last decade has a whole lot to do with the cut for local government aid. Again, in real after inflation dollars in Governor Plenty's 2 terms, LGA has been cut by half. Half of that's been made up again statewide with service cuts, and the other half with property tax increases. The property tax, as you know, is the most unfair tax of all because you have to pay the increase whether or not you have a job, an income, whether you're a business or a farm, producing a profit. And you know, I ask people around the state, you know, have your taxes gone up? Well, Tim Bloody says your taxes haven't gone up. Your people's property taxes have gone up unless their home values have plummeted. Fees have gone up for everybody, students and everybody else. So it's not a question in this election of tax or no tax, it's which tax on who. And Tom Emmer says, you know, eliminate LGA, which means especially the, you know, Minneapolis, St. Paul, but also the poorest. I was in Wadena a couple weeks ago, right after the tornado, to help with the cleanup, and the mayor took me around, and he said, I'd like to have Tom Emmer come up here and his running mate who want to eliminate LGA and show them what, in Wadena, he said 1/3 of the households have a per capita income, have a net worth. 1/3 of the households have a net worth less than $15,000. So we're a poor community. He said, and it's amazing, blocks were flattened, yet no one was killed, no one was seriously injured. He said that wouldn't have been possible without LGA, without an early warning system, without an emergency response system, without hospital and ambulance response capabilities that LGA helped to provide. So yes, it's crucial for Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's crucial for the relatively poorer areas of the state that don't have the property values of the suburbs. And it's crucial to keep property taxes down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Harv, number 2 for Harv.
Do you have a kitchen cabinet style agriculture expert that you go to on a regular basis?
Al Junkie's been helping me with some advice, good advice. Gary Werdish was my agriculture staff person when I was in the U.S. Senate. He's now vice president of the Minnesota Farmers Union. I'd say certainly 2 of them are people I talk to, consult with. I listen to farmers as I go around the state. I've had 5 community meetings, one in every county. I did 87 counties in 87 days. A lot of farmers came because they were during the winter and early spring, and got a lot of input that way.
I'm just going to say this. Tom Emmer is the worst Republican candidate in my lifetime and your lifetime. If you guys, any 3 of you, don't win, it's a disgrace, and I'm going to be very disappointed.
I take that responsibility hugely seriously. Hugely seriously.
I was going to say, no pressure there.
I'm an old hockey goalie. I'll take the pressure. If I can make a difference.
Really selfish question. I'm one of the underemployed. I'm an engineer. One of Valenti's initiatives at the beginning of his reign was to bring biotechnology to Minnesota. I read your jobs plan. I didn't see anything there for science or technology.
That's a good criticism. That's certainly an omission. Absolutely.
We have a great medical school. We have a great college of biological sciences. We have lots of good engineers.
Yeah, I was pre-med in college, and I applied to the top 8, actually top 10. I think Minnesota was back. University of Minnesota Medical School was then the number 8. Today, in various surveys, and I'm not an authority, but the surveys put it somewhere in the 20s. That really concerns me. I mean, we need the University of Minnesota to be one of the premier medical facilities. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, your point's very well taken. It's certainly a glaring omission in my jobs plan, and I'll remedy it and welcome your input. What the role the state can play in encouraging technology. Somebody else mentioned biotechnology, same thing. Thank you. It will be as of tomorrow. Thank you. I get my best ideas from these dialogues. Thank you very much.
All right, anybody else? In the back.
Mark is fine, but thank you.
I'm a native Iowa.
Yeah.
Been in Minnesota for a long time. One of the things that works in Iowa is commission-driven redistricting. Where do you stand on that? Because fundamentally, I think gerrymandered districts are at the root of most of our issues.
We say commission, meaning we have a judicial group.
They do it independently. Yeah. The legislature's not involved, and it's apolitical.
Well, the legislature in the last 3 decades has failed to come up with an acceptable plan, so there's been a judicial panel.
Right.
And frankly, the previous 2, I think, were very fair. Federal Judge Gerald Haney, who recently passed away, headed the 3-judge panel. Each of those. The last one, I was very disappointed. Governor Ventura appointed the judges. They gleefully threw, and I don't have my numbers exactly, but I believe it was 54 legislators into 27 districts. They forced 27 people who had been elected 2 years before by their constituents out of the legislature. And these were all 5 appointed judges who sort of gleefully, and they gerrymandered Bill Luther's district. Literally, they moved it 200 yards to throw him in with, I think it was Representative Klein.
He was my rep.
Well, I mean, I thought it was. So again, I guess there's not a perfect world. But if I appoint a judicial panel, it'll be nonpartisan, bipartisan. It should be totally removed from politics. But I want to ask the judges: are you going to be respectful of the fact that these women and men have been elected? I don't think you should, preserve their, boundaries unreasonably, but neither should you unreasonably throw them together and say somehow you're doing a good deed by throwing 27 incumbent legislators out of office.
I appreciate that. You'll allow the follow-up to you. What I'm asking is, would you push for the system that Iowa has basically proven works?
Well,
it doesn't need a governor's input on occasion. It just sits there and works.
Well, we have a law in place now. I'd have to look at the law. What I propose changing the law next year, I don't know. I can't say at this point. But as I say, the last 3 decades, the de facto result has been a judicial panel commission. I mean, is the commission non-judicial? Who the governor appoints a panel? How does that work?
It is. Well, it's permanently placed now.
Okay.
It basically keeps.
Well, I'll certainly look at what they've done. I'll look at what they've done there. We ought to have again, redistricting ought to be free from political considerations, the best that's humanly possible, and it ought to be done impartially and fairly.
Anybody else? Which is
why I'll just say editorially, I think the aspersions that are being cast on the 2008 election still do a great disservice to Minnesota. The integrity of our small d democratic process And I'd say the same thing if the Republican Norm Coleman had won the election. It's crucial. People have to have confidence that there's certain standards that are above politics, and that in a democracy every vote counts. It counts one is cast legally. The same thing with things like redistricting. And that's just integral to, again, small d democracy.
I had a nice little exchange with the guy that did that one, and he's a wannabe Andrew Breitbart.
All right, anything else? All right, thank you.
Mark, let me ask you this. You know, previously we've had this Democratic majority with a Republican governor. Certainly there's a concern that perhaps that majority may decrease, but we want a Democratic governor. What do you see as far as the ability to finalize your legislative agenda? Should there be a significant shift in what the body of the legislature is?
Well, unfortunately, unlike the U.S. Senate, you don't have a 60-vote supermajority requirement in either the Minnesota House or Minnesota Senate. I mean, my role model for working with the legislature was Rudy Perpich. I worked for him in the executive branch, and his first 2 terms, first in his office and as an agency head. And I mean, like Tim Pawlenty, he came out of the legislature. Unlike Tim Pawlenty, he both understood the process and respected the process, and understood that we have checks and balances, and worked with the legislature integrally. Had his commissioners work with the legislative process and his staff, and really worked right through the end of it to work things through, and that would certainly be what I will endeavor to do. I mean, any legislator, all 201 of them, will have their own opinions and have their own, authenticity, having just been elected. But if they don't like my budget, for example, I'm going to challenge them to propose an alternative, as I'm challenging people today. I mean, as I put mine out there, and it's, I mean, there's no easy answers, and there's just better answers and worse answers, and in my view, they're right and wrong answers. So, if they don't like my budget proposal, and then what's the alternative? Because constitutionally, they, as if I'm governor, have to balance the budget. And the reality is, for every dollar of revenue that somebody won't raise, they're going to have to cut or shift $1 and take it away from somewhere that's going to really matter. I mean, I think what's been lost in part of this debate is the fact that from the last biennium to this one, state spending has decreased by 8.2%. We've already cut significantly. They have, the governor and the legislature. I mean, I've been through the budget line item twice. I would like anybody to show me where they're, and no one has so far. They can talk in generalities, but people who don't want to raise as much revenue as I have not. No one's been able or willing to say where they're going to cut $3 or $4 or $6 billion from that budget. $6 billion is 16% of the state budget. Over half of it goes for education. 96% of it goes for education, health and human services, public safety, transportation, local government aids, and the debt service. That's 96% of the budget. And I mean, so the alternatives are I think are draconian. And I challenge anybody. I mean, yes, job creation, but read what Federal Reserve Bernanke said today. The reality is job creation, state and nation, we should do everything we possibly can, and I will as governor. And I've got a 10-point proposal lacking technology, but the other 10 are pretty good, and they can certainly stand some more, and I'll do everything I can for jobs. But the reality is you need 840,000 additional jobs at the average income taxes paid by the average worker in Minnesota to make up the $4 billion that I'm proposing to raise by making the rich pay their fair share of taxes. So anybody who doesn't want to do that better tell you where they're going to cut and who it's going to hurt. Well, I've always been a strong, steadfast, staunch proponent of a woman's right to choose from the beginning of my political career. And I believe, I support, again, local school board decision making, but in principle I believe that there should be age appropriate and appropriate sex education for children who don't get that elsewhere.
bring a quarterback. Pat.
It's been my understanding that there is a possibility to create state banks, and I believe one state out of 50 has actually done so, and that bank has been working very successfully for decades, and I wonder if that would be a possibility for us in this time of financial difficulty.
The question is, how do you capitalize it? I mean, Leslie Davis talks about just creating numbers out of a computer program. But that's the only proposal I've even seen that way. I mean, North Dakota has the state bank. We had set it back up in the 1930s, I believe it was, when they did theirs, or the 20s, whenever it was, and had built the capital and the equity in it. I wish, if we had that, but we'd have to issue public debt. We issue bonds for capital investments. And I don't know, the total gross state product is $262 billion. So to impact that as a state government, and I speak against my own proposals to have a bonding bill next year, $1 billion. We ought to do everything we can, but you're not going to be able to capitalize the state bank at a fractional of what that is needed to impact the state economy.
I saw another hand here. Bill.
Gambling in Minnesota. I know it's a big question, but the Indians got the right to have casinos, and some of them got really rich, and some of them are just dirt poor. Is there any way we can level the field?
Well, I mean, the old retailing axiom is, success is three principles: location, location, location. And you're right. The Shakopee, the Mystic Lake, where you have a relatively small tribe in terms of number of people, with the one tribe, casino in the metropolitan area, immediate area. The last reported payout was over $1 million per member. And you have places like, obviously Red Lake and others that don't have the location. I mean, the state can't do that equalization. We don't have the authority to do so. I mean, those are separate, statutory entities under federal law. So, there has been some equalization among them, but that's really, that's their prerogative, not the state.
But could the state use gambling to raise revenue?
Well, I've said we're going to have to turn, with a $6 billion deficit. And even my proposal on making the rich pay their share is $4 billion. We got $2 billion to somewhere else, more revenue cut. I think we have to turn every revenue card face up on the table. I've said I will consider one state-owned, operated casino at the Mall of America or the airport, where you'd bring more tourism into the state, where you'd give the Mystic Lake, I think, some needed competition. Competition is good for retailers. It's good for politicians. I think it's good for that. The legislature would have to consider that. I've got now hundreds of thousands of dollars of tribal money being used to try to defeat me in the primary. So be it. But, on the other hand, and I say this, tribe, I've been out in greater Minnesota, whether it's being Mille Lacs or up in White Earth, for example, Monoman County, which is one of the poorest counties in the state, where those, employ thousands of people, tribal members, non-tribal members. They're hugely important, valuable economic engines for the entire region, and I don't want to see anything happen that would harm those successes.
Anybody else? I guess we got one, back here.
Senator Steve, if you'll indulge me a minute, as a daily political blogger, I try to get my research together, so on and so forth. And I've spoken with a lot of the candidates that were in the race, dropped out or whatever, just not there anymore. But a feeling I've had all along since day one, after 12 years of cuts on Ventura and Kalani, the state, in spite of what the Republicans would tell us, the state does not have a spending problem. The state has a revenue problem. You are the only candidate that has addressed that problem. In secret, in private one-on-one conversations with some of your competitors, they agree. But it's between them and me. They don't go public with it. The fact of the matter is, I commend you for being the one candidate that identifies that Minnesota has a revenue problem. And Tim Kalani spent 8 years telling the country in the National Republican Party that he's the guy that cuts taxes. Well, as you've already addressed earlier today, by moving things around and so on and so forth, what we pay out of our pockets on an annual basis hasn't changed a bit in 8 years. But he's telling everybody nationally that he's cut the taxes in Minnesota. Are we any better off? Of course not. So I commend you for being the one guy that says this has got to be done. My follow-up question was going to be, what about the other $2 billion, which you've already addressed that a little bit with a potential casino. But I like your idea of earmarking most of those funds for education.
Let me address, are we better off? I think that's the crux of the question. Back when 1970s, 80s, we had DFL governors, DFL legislature, we had relatively progressive taxes. We were consistently in the top third, usually the top 10 among the states in the nation in top employment growth. Under Governor Plenty in the last 7 years, they kept statistics, we have averaged in the bottom 10 among the states in employment growth. Minnesota has been below the national average in the growth of per capita personal income in 5 of the last 6 years. The state economic forecasters, objective, totally non-political economic forecasting unit, said that's unique in Minnesota's history. That our growth in employment and personal income is below the national average, bottom 10 in employment. So the formula of the last 20 years, it said, and back then it was always bad business climate, still bad business climate. They forget, Tom Emmer, you think we'd had DFL governor the last 20 years rather than 2 Republicans and a wrestler turned libertarian, the Minnesota Chamber. We're going to have a bad business climate until, my great-grandchildren are in the grave if they have their say. But the reality is, we did better then. And as Paul Wilson said, we all do better when we all do better. And Minnesotans generally did better during that time. And I, as Commissioner of Economic Development back in the 70s and 80s, would ask businesses, why are you locating or expanding in Minnesota? And the answers are almost always the same. Number one, well-educated, hard-working, productive citizens, which is why education is so crucial. Good healthcare system, good quality of life, good infrastructure, so you can get your goods to market, so you can get your employees to and from work. Good quality state and local government services. And as the 2 probably leading state economic authorities in government, nonpartisan professional, state economist Tom Stinson, state demographer Tom Gillespie will tell anybody who'll listen, not including Governor Plenty who won't, the key to our future success is education. The key to our future success are those same foundational ingredients that I just talked about. And if we sacrifice them, we do so at our peril. Because we're not going to compete with. I've been to China 7 times the last decade. I've seen some of those 1.3 billion people willing to work and work very hard at jobs that used to be here and work for 60, 70 cents an hour, 100 to 120 hours a week, because it's better than 2 cents an hour in the village. I went to one Nike plant outside of Shanghai, a quote-unquote small plant, only 5,000 workers. The large ones have over 100,000 workers. They told me 250 pairs of hands touches every pair of Nike shoes they manufacture there. It's not high-tech, it's not automation, it's cheap labor. It's August, the young women are sewing the seams, the young men are standing 100-degree temperature in front of these industrial waffle irons, the sole comes in, they put it down, perforated, someone else puts it in the oven, cooks it, someone else takes it out. But again, they're upwardly mobile, they're ambitious, it's better than 2 cents an hour in the village. But what they don't have in China, they have a company called M3 that takes 3M products, Scotch tape and stick-ems, and they imitate them. They can imitate, but they don't yet have the ability, which we have here, which is the key to our future success and prosperity in the state. For people who grow up in a free society, in a capitalist economy where you can aspire to be who you want to be, where you're well-educated, where you can have an idea, start a successful small business, stay successful, grows maybe to a medium, grows large. There's DigiKey up in Thief River Falls that employs 2,000 people. Started in a man's garage about 30 years ago. They have 450,000 stock-keeping units of all these little electronic component devices. Why can they be up in Thief River Falls and want to add 900 more jobs if they get the infrastructure improvement? Because they have a 99.85% success fulfillment of their orders within 24 hours. Because they have automation, but they have good, well-educated, hardworking, productive people. That's the key to our future success. That's the key to our future prosperity. It needs revenues, invest in education, invest in people, invest in the foundation of this state. If we do that, we'll be successful. If we don't, I fear for our future. Thanks very much.
You said that we needed to bring it in about 8 o'clock, and you are right on the money.
Right.
Congratulations, Mark. Thank you very much, Mr. Dayton, for coming and speaking to us. We appreciate it a lot.